I was a kid, and I remain like a little kid, I refused to eat anything I could associate with part of an animal. I wouldn't eat anything with liver or kidney in it because I knew I had a liver and kidneys in me. It was, for me, certainly at an early age, a sentimental decision. I just didn't like the idea. I thought it was terrible. I didn't know anything about the details, didn't know any other vegetarians. A couple of friends of mine were in the League Against Cruel Sports. I thought, well, the least I can do is join. I've been against this all my life. I hate the Cumbrian hunts. I hate everything they stand for. And of course, I found out that there were hunts in and around Newcastle as well. What really annoyed me was I found out about the Braes of Derwent foxhounds that operate just outside Consett, and Consett is my family's hometown. That meant a lot to me. Probably 3 or 4 months after that, somebody said, we're doing a campaign against otter hunting. As soon as I found out about that, I went out with what was then called the North East Council of Hunt Saboteurs to help them sabotage the Northern Counties otter hounds. And the fact is, probably for the next 15 years, I was an active saboteur. I'd become an activist.
Pleasure actually talking about my life really.
A copper from Tunbridge, copper from Special Branch and a copper from somewhere else. There was no one in, I was at work, C was out. They came along and they kicked the front door in, came and sat down on the sofa, switched the telly on and were watching cricket when she came home. They got my address book, which had my old headmaster's name and address in it, so he's probably listed as a radical rebel.
But yeah, you didn't call me. I did become involved in illegal things without any shadow of doubt. But what we didn't think about then, and I think people think far more about it now, are consequences. We actually didn't think we were going to get caught. We seemed to feel we were invincible because actually we thought we were right, 100% right, and nothing was going to stop us.
First time I was arrested was way back in the mid-70s at Altcar, the Waterloo Cup. That, if you like, was the cup final of hare coursing. That's now been abolished. It still happens, but it happens illegally.
But yeah, you didn't call me.
While we were in prison on that first sentence, because there was 2 of us got sentenced to 3 years, I was delighted to one day to open the newspaper and some of these smoking beagles had actually been rescued from the laboratory. But I mean, unfortunately, an old friend and fellow activist and still doing great work for the animals, he was arrested in connection with this, with theft of burglary and theft of at least one of these beagles. I'm not sure how many it was that came out, but I don't think they got the dogs back. But he was arrested in connection with it, and ended up though having the charges dropped because ICI didn't want the embarrassment of a court case and it all being exposed in the media.
I got arrested at the Waterloo Cup, the hare coursing. We did the Altcar 7, and I refused to be bound over, so I went to prison for 7 days, to Holloway for 7 days. So that gave me another eye-opener about women in prison.
But yeah, you didn't call me.
I was targeted by the owners of these moors, who had massive tracts of land, and they managed in 1981 to secure a lifelong injunction against me, restraining me from going onto the grass moors for the rest of my life during the shooting season.
The last sentence I had was a 10-year sentence. I was sentenced to 10 years.
That was for conspiracy, wasn't it?
Conspiracy to...
very much a catch-all.
Conspiracy to kind of cause criminal damage and inciting other people to cause damage, and this was to places associated with the persecution of animals, laboratories, etc.
I was out with a chap called Harry Grimwood, who was a bit older than me, and a couple of young lads, a 14 and a 15-year-old, and it was the back end of the cub hunting season, and they'd drew a fox in a kale field, and I sort of ran down this little valley, jumped over a wall and started blowing the hunting horn to try to bring the hounds over. The next thing I knew, I was assailed by 4 or 5 hunt heavies who told me to get off the land in no uncertain terms. But before I was able to go anywhere, I was punched and knocked to the ground, and then sort of, they was putting the boots in, and I remember them looking, saying, "Where's that hunting horn?" And as they were sort of trying to search me, they started ripping my trousers. And then I remember them shouting, "Rip his fucking trousers off," and I was being tossed into the air, and then the trousers, I looked like one of those cartoon characters on a desert island, sort of kind of ripped to shreds, and I was then rolled in cow dung. We, at the end of it, we went to report it to the police, and I was arrested and charged with breach of the peace, and ended up being prosecuted for it.
I watched a dig out by the Linlithgow and Stirlingshire hunt in the middle of Scotland, not far from Falkirk. They dug a fox out for 3.5 hours. Sadly, there was only 12 of us there. We would have intervened. The local police force, and there was quite a few of them, stopped us getting anywhere near the thing. To be fair, had we done so, we may well have been beaten up by terrier thugs. But they dug that fox out, we couldn't do anything about it. For 3.5 hours, threw it to the hounds. That to them is sport.
I joined the RSPCA and the League Against Cruel Sports. Both of them attracted me, and particularly with the League Against Cruel Sports, I would go out on boxing days, a couple of boxing days, to the north of London, and we'd demonstrate round the green at the hunt meet with banners and get some publicity, and then climb on board the coach and come back to London again. That was in 1960, 62 when I joined them. But yeah, you didn't fool me.
John, when did you first get involved in the animal rights movement? And what was it like then, and what got you involved?
It was all a long while ago. I married into the animal rights cause when I was 18 years old, and I'm now drawing my pension, so we can see how far back it goes. I really at an early age, it was publicity about the clubbing to death of baby seals out in Canada that was exposed by the International Fund for Animal Welfare. It was concern about killing of animals in Africa for sport. That was the World Wildlife Fund, as it then was. But when I used to collect money for both those organisations, people would say to me, "Oh, you don't have to go abroad to see cruelty to animals. You'll find it at the hunts in this country." And I took the lead from there, and I went out to watch what hunts did, just as a sort of bystander. I had no idea what was going on, but I asked questions and I watched. And I soon realised that I wanted to side with the fox. To my mind, it was bullying. It was obscene bullying. It was a big bunch of people on horses and with vehicles and that, chasing after an animal a little bigger than a good-sized tomcat. And I thought, well, I'd want to stand with that animal. I don't want it to, I want to do my best to help it escape. And that's how I got involved.
You were there at the very start of the Hunt Saboteurs Association back in the 60s. How did it all come about, Dave?
Late 1963, a guy called John Prestige, he was a budding journalist down in Brixham in Devon. He formed the Hunt Saboteurs Association. I joined in April's 1964, and I was put in touch with the Weybridge group in Surrey. I didn't have a car or anything. I used to travel down there by train and cadge lifts. But very shortly after I joined, there was an incident down in Devon. The Brixham group were, by that time, they'd done a few fox hunts, and we were into the otter hunting season then. So they'd gone out to do the Comstock otter hounds, and they'd been attacked. They'd been hemmed in, and the otter hunters had stove all their windows in with otter hunt poles, and they tried to set fire to it by taking off the unlocking petrol camp and putting lighted matches in the petrol. And they dragged the driver out, Leo Lewis, and they broke his jaw. And it eventually ended up in court, that one. And I think the two guys who were caught for doing the most damage got fined £10. And all the hunt saboteurs in the car got bound over to keep the peace for a year.
Yes.
2 weeks after the event, there was a call went out to all the hunt saboteur groups. There weren't very many at the time, to go down there and put a show of force on with the against the Comstock otter hounds. So we went down. I think it was a place called Iddesleigh. Can't remember the river. Might have been the River Colne. And we just trooped along the. It was my first experience with an otter hunt. We trooped along the riverbanks, and I was so impressed. There was a guy, he was a trawlerman from Brixham called Shipman Evans, great name, and he was just wading down the middle of the river. It was sort of knee, thigh deep, and he had an orange smoke flare in each hand, just walking ahead of the pack. And I was so impressed. I thought, oh, this is for me.
I became a vegetarian in the 60s, but didn't really get involved with animal rights until I joined the Hunt Saboteurs in early 70s and joined a local group in Oxfordshire where we did the Heathrop hunt.
I joined the Labour Party and the Hunt Saboteurs Association and the League Against Cruel Sports more or less on the same day in 1976 when I was a teenager, and threw myself into it with great gusto and got involved and set up a local organisation. There wasn't an active Hunt Saboteurs group in the local area in Derby, so I organised an inaugural meeting of the East Midlands Hunt Saboteurs Association, and we went really from strength to strength.
When I was about 13, I went fishing in the River Thames with a friend, and a fish got away with my hook in its mouth. And I think really that was probably the trigger point, because I felt really, really miserable about that. I really did think that poor old fish is going to be going around for the rest of its life with my hook in its mouth. By the time I was 17, still at school, I went vegetarian. A friend of mine at the school, we were in a little band together. He was already vegetarian, and I took the opportunity of having gone away for a week with some of the lads on a holiday on the Isle of Wight to come back and tell my gran, who did all our meals, that I was vegetarian. She thought I would die, so she used to buy tins of beans with little bits of meat in and turn the label round. But you know, it didn't fool me.
When I first got involved, I joined a number of organisations, like the British Union for the Abolition of Vivisection, for example, and the Vegetarian Society and the Vegan Society. Interesting, the Vegetarian Society's got a great connection with the Labour movement, which I found very fascinating. Back in the latter part of the 19th century, worked very closely with the Labour movement, and partly around trying to give access to a decent balanced meal for working class families. And I thought that was a great synergy really between sort of two things I was passionate about.
What motivated you, Dave, to get as involved as you did, end up becoming Secretary of the Hunt Saboteurs, getting involved politically and with groups, once again, such as the RSPCA?
Well, I think, we appreciated that Hunt Saboteurs was fine in as much as it saved the animals' lives. That was the primary motivation. Secondary motivation was to bring it to the public's attention what was going on out there in the fields, and through our actions, the media getting interested in it. But then working again through the League Against Cruel Sports, who were working on the political front, the realisation that sabotage in itself forevermore wasn't the thing to aim for. There had to be more than that. We had to get a political solution to the whole thing, bring the whole concept of hunting to an end somehow, and that could only ever be through politics. So who did we look at there? The League Against Cruel Sports, as I say, they were working with parliamentarians, but also, as I've already mentioned, I'd already joined the RSPCA at an early stage. Now, in the early 70s, we went to their AGMs and they were chock-a-block with hunters. And having talked to other people who were involved for a long time and have looked into the history of the RSPCA, it became clear that the hunting fraternity had set up the branch system many, many years ago precisely to redirect the RSPCA away from any politicisation and just keep it involved with local issues, cats and dogs and stuff like that, and steer it away from any attempt whatsoever to get the concept of blood sports abolished.
We formed an organisation that we called the Band of Mercy. And the reason it was called the Band of Mercy was in the 19th century, strangely enough, there was an RSPCA youth group. I think it was a time when the RSPCA was perhaps rather more radical than they are now, and certainly this group of young people were, because they used to go around damaging guns that shooters were using, and to save animals, direct action. And we wanted to revive the spirit of that, so we called our group the Band of Mercy, and we started off by going to the hunt kennels and damaging their vehicles, maybe slashing the tyres or putting tacks in the locks and gluing the locks of their vehicles so they couldn't start the vehicles, couldn't get in the vehicles, that kind of thing. It wasn't huge amounts of damage, but we were trying to stop them actually going out hunting later on that day. And then that progressed. We heard about a laboratory being built in Milton Keynes where they were going to do radiation experiments on animals. And some of us decided, right, we'll go to this place and we'll try and, basically we wanted to destroy it. And we went there and we kind of, hid behind a wall and waited till the workforce had all gone. There was no one there, and then on 2 occasions we actually tried to burn this place down, this building that was under construction, and it wasn't destroyed, but there was a lot of damage done to it. And then some of us attacked a couple of boats up on the Wash in Lincolnshire, fishing boats that were used at the time in this annual slaughter of baby seals that they did up there. And one of these boats was destroyed, another was badly damaged. The whole thing resulted in the killing of seals not going ahead. So that was an early success for direct action. And then somebody who was a sympathiser provided us with a list of places that bred and supplied animals to laboratories, and these were kind of quite easy targets because a lot of the laboratories themselves had security. It was difficult to attack these places, but the places that supplied the animals, and there was also some places that supplied the laboratory equipment, cages and that kind of thing. They didn't have, really hardly any security at all, so they were an easy target. So we set about attacking these places, going really mainly damaging their vehicles, and eventually the inevitable happened, and a couple of us were caught and arrested and prosecuted, and I ended up being sentenced to 3 years in prison, and that would have been in 1975.
All of a sudden the ALF became to the fore because there was a trial in Oxfordshire, not too far from me, Ronnie Lee, Cliff Goodman and Robin Howard. And they'd been involved in stealing mice from Bicester. So it was in the local papers. So I went along there with some other friends from our local anti-hunting group, and lo and behold, I met some of the people who have become my closest friends, people I share philosophy with, David C. Wetton, Ronnie Lee, who was obviously on remand, I think, but Mike Huskerson, Sue Smith, all those wonderful people.
I found that a lot of other people wanted to do the same thing, and mostly young people involved in hunt sabs were coming up to me saying, I want to do that, I want to damage the laboratories, I want to do that type of thing. So it suddenly, from being just 6 of us to start with, and from the original 6 people, there were now lots of people, there were, you know, like probably dozens now wanting to be involved. And the name, we changed the name to the Animal Liberation Front because a lot of the people kind of coming into it didn't like the name, the Band of Mercy, because it didn't mention animals, it sounded religious, and they weren't very keen on the name. So we changed the name to Animal Liberation Front to sum up what it was all about. And then that same type of thing carried on. We carried on doing the same sort of action, except there were more people involved now.
I first saw you, Sue, when you were representing the Hunt Saboteurs Association on BBC's Open Door programme back in 1975. It was a real launching pad. Can you tell us a wee bit about that?
We got offered by the BBC to do Open Door. You know, and we've been arguing for it for a while because on BBC Two they used to let you, what you might call minorities or activists, have a spot.
We were given this opportunity by the BBC. They were running an Open Door series then, where they gave their facilities over to campaigning groups. They came to us and said, look, can you get something together within 2 weeks? So we said, yes, okay, you know, grab the opportunity. So I went through my records and I thought, well, we appeared on BBC News. You know, Hunt Saboteurs were newsworthy, you know, getting hunting across to the general public in that regard. So I said, well, yes, so we appeared on this programme, that news, and that news. All you've got to do is look those up and you'll get your snippets and we can get a programme going around that. They looked them all up and they'd all been wiped. So they thought, you know, what are we going to do? There was a guy from the South East London group, they were called WAPS, W-A-P-S, Wild Animals Protection Society. Bob Smith, he had some 8mm stuff that he'd taken on a hare coursing meeting that we'd sabotaged. And you saw the hare being coursed and caught, and then someone running out to pick the hare up and bring it back through the cars and be filmed just stretching its neck and killing it. And we started out the programme with that.
It was just quite incredible, the response. You know, we went on there, and actually what was more interesting was just before 2 people had actually got assaulted by the hunt. And so it just fell all into place. They were interviewed on the programme. We talked about hunting, you know, and the pros and cons. And I suppose we tried not to be too technical because we weren't quite sure, you know, what our audience was going to be. But we talked about tactics, etc., etc. And it was just totally amazing, the response, the thousands. And poor Dave Wetton had to deal with all that. He had no computers then.
Dave and C's house effectively and practically became the Hunt Saboteurs Association HQ. It was the hub.
That's right, yeah. The official address was the local post office box in Tunbridge, you know, where we live now. But it's always been a PO box. When we lived in Kingston, it was PO Box 130 in Kingston. Going back to the 60s, when I lived in Tooting, while my mum and my gran were away on a cruise, I had a mate round and we painted the front of the house up. Hunt Saboteurs HQ on the front of the house. And you can imagine my gran when she came back to that. I had to clear off quick and go on holiday.
You got involved with anti-blood sports as a Hunt Saboteur, but you quickly decided the logical way forward was to go undercover. Can you tell us a little bit about that decision?
Well, when I was first involved in the very early 70s, I was aware of a chap called Raymond Rowley, and he had taken some very powerful photographs by pretending to be a hunt supporter, and the images that he'd secured were very powerful. So I was aware right from the start of the value of gaining images of what happens in the hunting fields.
Some of those images have actually played a very significant part in the campaign to bring anti-hunting legislation to the statute book. Come on. I'm trying to get
We used to do hunting vicar demos as well. These hypocritical, there was the Reverend Robin Ray, now he was master of the Courtney Tracy otter hounds down in, where was it, Dorset I think, So we met at his church on one of his church days. Someone had put an image, a painting of a crucified otter against the altar, and we had posters that say hunting is a clerical error and things like that there. And one of our guys was dressed as St. Francis, or it looked like Jesus actually, because he had long hair and stuff. Then we did Reverend Eric Wheeler. He was in Essex. He hunted foxes, and we had Nigel dressed as a little imp sitting on a gravestone there, and someone ran a flag up the flagpole there about hunting being a clerical error there. And then we did, can't remember the guy's name, but in Preston, it was his last day as head churchman there, and they had all the scrambled egg brigade from the police at this one, and they knew there was going to be a demo, and they prevented some of us getting in, but quite a few of us got in, about 20 of us got in, and sat in the aisles, and at an appropriate time I led the walk down the aisle to the front, and we started singing, all things bright and beautiful, all creatures great and small, all things wise and wonderful, your vicar kills them all. And we had the brownies, they were sitting in the front, and they were singing along with us, but they didn't know the last line. And then all of a sudden, all the coppers came down the aisle, and they to escort us out, and we were getting all the congregation saying, that's disgraceful, So
Wellies and Co were effectively an all-female group of saboteurs. Now I know that you were one of the Wellies and Co. Could you tell us a little bit about that, Sue?
I suppose we were quite a powerful, dominant, bossy group of women. We all know what we thought and what we were thinking, what we thought. But it was very male-dominated, the hunt saboteurs. It really was, by the nature that you were going out into fields, you were putting yourself at risk. Women don't do that. And we were doing it every week, twice a week. And so a few of us, I think C. Wetton, myself, Lynn Chamberlain, and one or two other women thought, come on, let's just have an all-women group. And we came up with this name of Wellies and Co. because we all wore wellies. So we went to do the Vale of Aylesbury, which was in just outside Oxfordshire. And so we were all out that. That was the time when I got chased. It was on the Open Door programme by Ginger, we called him. And he roughed me up, and I put my fist into his balls, I will say quite bluntly. There were these men who thought they had to protect these little women, and we weren't little women, I can assure you. So we didn't do too much of Wellies and Co, but I think we were kind of making a point that we are just as tough as you. We can do what you can do. We can go into laboratories, we can climb over fences, we can run, and we can stand up for ourselves, and we can actually stand up for you on occasions, which we did.
We influenced the League Against Cruel Sports, and particularly the RSPCA, and through both of those, the legislators, into getting that Hunting Act through. That was incredibly important. It's flawed, and so the next stage has to be the younger generation working on those and get those flaws out of it.
The Hunting Act reached the statute book in 2004 in England. Sadly, there's a lot of people out there still hunting.
I think that basically they shouldn't be allowed to take the hounds out at all, because they're still allowed to do the trail hunting, right? Firstly, it still puts wildlife at risk, because how are they going to make sure that the hounds keeps that trail? Well, they'll be following the trail. A fox pops up, they're going to chase that fox, or they're going to kill that rabbit, or they're going to go after a deer. So wildlife is still in danger through trail hunting. That's the first thing. Secondly, what happens to the dogs? And a huge number killed. Thousands of the foxhounds were being killed because either as youngsters they weren't of the right temperament to fit in with the pack and to obey orders, or when they get old and they slow down, 5 or 6 years old, they get slower. That hasn't changed because whether it's trail hunting or whether it's chasing after an animal, it's the same rules. It's still they're hunting in a pack, they have to run together, they have to obey the commands.
And they're still going on killing foxhounds at the age of 6 or 7 anyway, as they always have, because they're always breeding hounds anyway. And then they'll often feed the carcasses, they cut them up into meat to feed back to the other hounds.
You're still getting this mass slaughter of the foxhounds, right? And even if you kind of left totally aside what happens to wildlife, that mass slaughter of foxhounds on its own is enough for the whole thing to be got rid of.
They are so obstructive. We had a badger digging case with the Thurlow foxhounds, and there was clearly the badger had been illegally blocked in its set, and the police went to the Thurlow foxhounds and said, "Can you tell us who was the terrier man on that day?" And they said no, and the case collapsed.
Yeah.
The great difficulty with the Hunting Act is proving that the huntsman or any of the rest of the redcoats had the intention of killing the fox, and that can be very, very difficult. Rather than the hounds just simply killing a fox, there has to be intent proved that the hunt meant to do that, and of course they lie through their teeth.
The redcoats in the hunt are much more devious. Of course, they're not hunting foxes. They're on a trail hunt. We wouldn't dream of hunting a fox. Very occasionally, there'll be a little mistake and the hounds will go off on a scent and kill a fox. What they don't tell you is that that's the whole ethos of the hunt. They've been trained to do this from a very early age. Every
single hunt in the country, without any doubt at all, is disobeying the Hunting Act. They're being sneaky about it. They don't deserve to carry on hunting as far as I'm concerned, but that's not going to be an easy job, because getting the Hunting Act through Parliament the first time round was a terribly difficult job. It toed and fro between the Commons and the Lords, and in the end it did need the Parliament Act to be brought in, and that's very rarely used.
Is it acceptable to break the law to further a cause, no matter how just you feel that cause is? What's your feelings about that, Ronnie?
I don't think the law is sacrosanct. I think what is sacrosanct is what is right and wrong. And we arrive at that conclusion through looking at the morality of things. And it's obviously wrong to torture animals. It's obviously wrong to slaughter animals. It's wrong to do experiments on animals. It's wrong to use animals for fur, all these other things. And so if people take action to prevent that and to save those animals, those are rightful actions. And it doesn't matter what the law says. It's not a question of what's legal, what's illegal. And don't forget, if you go back only a couple of 100 years, things like bull baiting and bear baiting, dog fighting, all those things, those were lawful. And if you tried to stop those things, you'd be arrested and probably put in prison. So, of course, it's not, what's lawful and unlawful doesn't always coincide with what's right and wrong.
Do you feel that direct action, including breaking the law, can actually bring about changes in the law for the better?
I think it can certainly, yes, I think it can play its part in that. Direct action, I think, can be part of a whole process whereby pressure is exerted for the law to be changed. Yeah, I think it can work in that way.
Within a political process.
Within the political process as well. I mean, you have to have the political process. The direct action on its own isn't going to change the law, but it can be part of the pressure.
You know, we've seen this down through the ages, really, where, you know, where activists have transgressed the law in order to get a change to the law, and have been prepared to take the consequences of it. And that's why I think, you know, people who engage in direct action, you know, I understand why they do that, and they can have a very powerful effect on actually getting the law changed. Yeah. So they're pioneers in that sense.
What is the term animal rights or animal liberation? Is there a difference between the two terms?
I think probably animal liberation is a good word, to be perfectly honest. I think there's similarities. But I think animal liberation to me is for us to stop exploiting animals, to stop eating them, using them for vivisection. And I don't love animals, don't get me wrong. I respect them. And I think we need to stop using them as a commodity, which we do. So that's what animal liberation means to me. And it's the same it's liberation, freeing them, respecting them. And so rights do come into that.
Animals have a right to life. They have a fundamental right to life. They have a right to live in freedom from pain. They have a right to live as natural a life as they possibly can. And I think we should do our best to ensure that they do. We get one go at life on this earth, just one go. Doesn't matter whether you're a kangaroo, a giraffe or a human being, you get one go at life on this earth. And to spend the entirety of your life in pain, misery and suffering because of the greed and callousness of man is appalling.
It's the right to life, the right to be free from cruelty, really, and the right to be, you know, treated, you know, with dignity and respect. The difference, in a sense, I suppose, from, say, animal welfare is that people who subscribe to animal welfare are, yes, I think, concerned about cruelty, but feel that it's still, and they may not use this term, but okay to exploit animals. But for me, I think, you know, an animal has a right to life. So I think that, in a sense, for me, you know, a right to life, a right to be treated with respect, and a right to be free from cruelty would sort of sum up my definition of what animal rights is about.
There are people today that very much talk about animal rights and argue for and explain why. And I don't really have a problem with, you know, with what they say. And I'm sure they're putting forward like a good argument for it. But I myself don't think in terms of rights. I think in terms of liberation. I think that I tend to think in terms of like kind of what's wrong. You know, like wrongs. In other words, that it's wrong for humans to oppress other animals. And that other animals need to be liberated from that oppression. And I prefer liberation because rights can be very much like a legal, kind of legal definition thing. But liberation is actually kind of a flesh and blood thing. You know, like an animal can, we talk about animal rights, so animals should be given rights and, you know, something should be passed in Parliament or whatever. But liberation is actually the state of those animals being freed from oppression. It's actually the reality of that rather than some kind of concept, if you see what I mean. So I much prefer to talk about animal liberation than animal rights.
Some folk level the issue, why do you value animals above humans? How do you feel about a question like that, John?
I value my own species the highest, but I value animals not far behind at all. People will say to me, oh, if you saw a dog and a child drowning, you'd rescue the dog first, wouldn't you? And I said, no. If I saw a dog and a child in a swollen river drowning, I would go in there and I'd get the child out first. I would get the child to safety, but then no power on earth would stop me from going back to get the dog.
If you're against the oppression of animals, how can you not be against the oppression of human beings?
People say we have dominion over the animals, which means we can do whatever we want with them. Dominion, I would like to think, says that you have a responsibility for, in this case, other species, animals on the planet.
Why did evolution give us dominance? Evolution gave us dominance over every other living creature on this planet, every bird, every fish, every mammal. We have to recognise why we got that dominance, and we have to give something back to the evolution that gave us that dominance, and we have to act as good shepherds on this earth.
It is about trying to get human beings to open their minds that animals are animals. They have feelings. They feel pain. I mean, the big argument about fish, there's so much scientific proof now that actually fish feel pain, but they're in denial. The human race, as far as animals are concerned, and other human beings, they're in total denial. They're separate from us. We're human beings. We're the master race. But we're not.
The fundamental reason for it is speciesism, or human supremacism. It's because humans, or most humans, think that for some reason humans are superior to other sentient animals. Humans are more important than those animals, and so therefore all these things follow from that. In other words, that animals can be abused, be persecuted, be oppressed, that their interests don't need to be given proper consideration.
Do you feel that the economic system works very much against animal rights?
If we really want to achieve animal liberation in any widespread way, we have to abolish capitalism, because it's a system based on greed. So it drives consumption, and it will drive industrialisation. It will drive all these things that harm the environment and therefore harm animals that live within the environment. We can't have animal liberation because of the impacts on the natural world that capitalism inevitably causes.
And the thing is, I think it's an unanswerable argument. And even if, somebody's not so concerned about cruelty, I think everybody's going to be concerned about the survival of humanity, the survival of the planet. And so those environmental consequences, I think of the livestock industry are quite a powerful argument.
We've got power, control of people with money. And isn't it sad to think that animals are suffering, that the world is heating up, people are starving because of money and power and control?
The whole issue around animal rights is intrinsically linked with the environmental movement, and for the reason we've already outlined in terms of the importance of going vegan, the importance of reducing the amount of meat that we consume and dairy products, because of the catastrophic effect that this is having on the world's environment and the impact that that will have.
We have a lot more vegans now than we used to have, but so few of those vegans are active. They're just kind of passive vegans that eat a vegan diet, and it's all about what they don't do. I don't eat animal products. I'm not going to go to the animal circus. I'm not going to go to the zoo. I'm not going to buy from a charity shop that funds vivisection, and all that's good. Not doing things, but it's not enough. There has to be an active element. We have to actively go out there and promote veganism and change other people.
I think you've got to have faith. It doesn't matter how cynical you are, you've got to have faith. And I do have faith in young people, and I've always had faith in young people. I really like young people. Definitely they are our future. And I'm not going to see animal liberation in my life. I'm going to be long dead. But you've really got to believe and have faith that these young people will get the message.
We have to learn to treat our animals and environment with respect, or neither will be there long. And of course, as it's often said, once the bees go, we go soon after. We ain't going to outlive the bees.
Yeah, indeed.
We need them, and we need the fish in the sea. We need the birds in the sky. You know, I walked my dog and I was walking it the other day and the skylarks were going up, and it's a beautiful sound, skylarks. Beautiful, pure sound. And to my mind, there's more beauty in nature than in all the artworks of man.
What everyone can do is think how they affect the planet. There was an old Friends of the Earth saying, which I thought was very good. Think globally, but act locally. And I think that rings very, very true today.